my name is, as he said, Taryn Cantor. I'm not a therapist. I'm 27 years old and I was in treatment here at Clearview on my 21st birthday. And yes, I came that day. I wasn't gonna miss it. I do have some disclaimers before I start that I've added today since I got here. The first one is that I'm talking about DBT because that's the only one I have experience with. I can't speak to any of the other things that might work. Most of them I hadn't heard about before today, so that was kind of exciting. Second, I have a weird sense of humor, so I'm sorry if I offend anyone. The third one is that I'm here to tell my experience, and I'm not just going to talk about what it's like to have BPD, though I probably will touch on that more than a little. I want to talk also about healing, because the healing process for me was more important than the living with BPD. I think that is key. Then the last thing is, if you have questions, can you write them down and save them for the end? Because I don't want to lose my train of thought. And also I don't know how much they'll have enough time to get to everything. So I want to make sure that I cover everything and then deal with questions. So I would love to hear them at the end. And if we don't have time, then later. Anyway, when I was a kid, I wanted to be different. I wanted to be special. Most of all, though, I wanted to be seen. I didn't know how to go about it in a healthy way, so I communicated the need in unhealthy ones, mostly self-harm. I was talking with someone earlier, and I described living like that as craving something, where you need something, but you don't know what it is. And it's constant, and it's painful. And I can trace that all the way through my life. Like, I needed something, I just didn't know what it was. So it got chalked up to different things, and I tried different things, and the one that dealt with it best was self-harm, so that's the one that stuck. So I met my first therapist when I was 7, my second when I was 13, and my third when I was 15. It can't be said that I didn't receive help. The fact that the help didn't help is more that my therapists were not equipped to deal with me, and that I wasn't really there to get better. I was there to be seen, and because it was what was expected of me. By the time I hit college, I had kind of gathered that something was not right inside me. I kind of picked up on that from everyone else. I just didn't understand. Why did the things I do push people away when I was trying to pull them closer? It made sense in my head, but no one else seemed to react the way I expected. I couldn't figure it out. I had this idea of how they would react, how they would respond to things that I did, and it never seemed to work, and it always baffled me. Like, it was always a surprise. You'd think after a while I'd have gotten used to it, but I didn't. After today, that makes a little more sense. But anyway, at that point, I'd long since started lying, because that was a big part of me when I was younger. My lying kind of defined me. But at that point, around college, I was finally realizing I didn't like it. I didn't like who I was, no, but mostly I just didn't like who I'd made myself into. I tried to make myself into someone I would like, and it hadn't worked. It backfired horribly. So not long after I started coming clean about lying, I was diagnosed with BPD. I learned about borderline and the attached stigma during my first psychiatric hospitalization at the end of my sophomore year in college. I was 19, so pretty young for a diagnosis of BPD, which is good. After I was honest with the psychiatrist about my work to stop lying, he diagnosed me with BPD. It took about 15 minutes. The paperwork he had the nurse print for me told me I was likely to manipulate people, self-harm, lie, have destructive relationships, do drugs, and die from suicide sooner rather than later. It also mentioned I was incurable. There was, as I recall, one line in the 5 or 6 pages about DBT maybe working, but it was so small that I didn't even remember it till later. It was just an aside. Some people have found that DBT might work. And I was like, well, it won't work for me. It was so small. It was practically an asterisk. And the word doomed definitely applies here, because that's exactly how I felt. When you're told your future is dark and unpleasant at 19, what do? Do you just go with it, or do you fight it? I decided on a sort of doomed to fail approach. I was clearly hopeless, beyond help, beyond recovery of any kind. And I was convinced I had brought it on myself with my lying. It was a fun fall semester. I spent the beginning of my junior year in not so quiet shame and desperation. I wanted my friends to know I was hurting, but I was ashamed of being diagnosed with something I hadn't actually had an opinion on before. I wanted them to know I was doomed, but I was ashamed to tell them, because we knew other people with BPD, and I didn't want to be associated with those people. So I didn't actually talk to them because I didn't know how to. Instead, self-harm ramped up alarmingly, along with several other risk-taking behaviors. There we go. Things came to a head December 23rd, 2011, when I rather spontaneously overdosed in an attempt to commit suicide. After I explained to the remarkably calm nurse that I had absolutely no idea why I had done it, and therefore, no, I couldn't guarantee I wouldn't do it again. I was hospitalized a second time. For the record, it was 4 times in a year after total, but I digress. My psychiatrist's reaction was just to coldly comment that he couldn't prescribe that particular medication to me again, so I got a new psychiatrist too. Afterwards, my poor, rather fed-up therapist suggested some sort of treatment program. That's not where the change began. The real change was my second program, which, luckily for me, was this one. I actually remember this ceiling. Clearview was a totally novel experience for me. I was absolutely fascinated by it. And I didn't tell myself I was just there to observe, as I'd done before in treatment scenarios. You know, I'm just watching everyone, just seeing what it's really about. I'm undercover, kind of thing. You see, I'd started having this recurring thought, and it kept coming up, as recurring thoughts do. I can't go on as I have been. Even I knew my life was unsustainable. I'd reached a turning point, and I knew it. And for once, I didn't fight the turn. I leaned into it. I wanted to learn everything they had to teach, and I think I did a pretty solid job of it. Not gonna lie, though, it helped immensely that everyone who worked here was pretty awesome. I'd only heard my old therapist swear once in the entire 4+ years we worked together. My first day here, I learned that we don't need to stint on the swear words. It's very comforting in a weirdly sweary way. While I was here, there were many turning points for me, moments that defined my experience. The whole experience itself was a turning point, really. It stuck with me in a way therapy never had. Therapy had always been a show up, talk, or don't, and leave. Nothing came with me when I left. I didn't expect it to help, it was just what I was expected to do. I didn't take the things any of my therapists said and internalize them. I don't think I even realized I was expected to. Obviously that has since changed. One day, early in my time at Clearview, I was having terrible self-harm urges and went to one of the staff, expecting them to fix it for me. I'd been self-harming since the age of 4, and had rarely, if ever, not engaged with an urge when it came up. So yeah, I expected them to fix it because I knew I certainly couldn't. Instead, they handed me a list of distraction techniques. I proceeded to half-heartedly give each technique about a minute to work. If I didn't feel better almost immediately, I declared it a failure. After about half an hour or so, I'd reached the end of the list. I went back to the same staff member and announced that the list just wasn't working. I'm not really sure what I was expecting to happen. It wasn't like she was going to say, oh, okay, well, if it didn't work, then go ahead. You're good. I think it was more about finding out what the secret fix was that surely had to exist, the thing that would eliminate the urges entirely. Instead, she asked me if I was being willful right now. I immediately and emphatically responded, no. And I realized as soon as I said it that I was definitely being willful and that everyone but me had seen it. It was a moment of real clarity. I was in control of my urges for once. And it was honestly quite startling to realize that I could actually choose not to harm, that I actually had that much power. I think a lot of people believe that therapy is basically the therapist says something magical and boom, big realization and you're all better. Wow, now I can go about my life without that pesky depression. One of the first things I learned from DBT was that I'm the one learning to drive. The therapist is just in the passenger seat helping me figure out how to. The skills themselves made a true impact too. One day there was an instance in the group where one of the therapists said something about our treatment. I don't remember exactly what it was, and I wish I did. I believe it was something along the lines of what could help us, to think about it. You know, a very DBT thing to say. And I responded, trying to be funny, "That's your job, isn't it?" And I realized instantly that what had sounded very funny in my head wasn't. That happens sometimes. After sitting there for a bit, I went to find that therapist. I used a DBT technique that I erroneously assumed everyone would know, called Dear Man, which is basically a communication technique. It's a format for writing requests or apologies, communicating, basically. Because I knew that it would be effective and that it would be received particularly well. I think that was one of my first Dear Mans, and her positive response stuck really well. She was so receptive to what I was saying, and I felt better after communicating, even if it was in this weird, formal way. I'd never been able to do that. When I'd done something wrong, I couldn't make repairs. I just sat there and hoped that they would forget. All of my relationships still benefit from Dear Mans, even though mine are not as structured anymore. For me, the most fascinating element to therapy is watching your brain shift. It began to come pretty naturally for me, surprisingly soon. The most obvious example is that here we were gently taught to use non-judgmental language. Instead of saying a behavior was bad or good, we'd say it was effective or ineffective. Well, one day my brother picked me up from here. On the way home, I was cheerfully telling him about my day. I remember that we'd done a mindfulness exercise that day that involved describing something in the room around us. I'd been so pleased with my description that I was telling him about the plant in the corner I'd described to everyone. And I think it was that corner. See, this plant was kind of on its way out, if you know what I mean. But as best I can recall, my exact words to my brother were, "There's this plant in the corner where the leaves are kind of going bad. Sorry, going ineffective." This new way of speaking had sunk in deeply enough that I automatically corrected myself, albeit incorrectly, without a pause. For the record, after I said it, I figured out why that didn't sound right. It just took a moment. Change your words, you change your thoughts, you change your brain patterns. I'm no longer considered to have BPD. I don't fit the criteria anymore. It's pretty awesome to have reached this point. When I was diagnosed, I was told it was a forever thing. Most mental illnesses are, after all. I was shocked when my therapist told me I couldn't be diagnosed with it anymore. Like, that can happen? It was a really weird moment, but exciting, because looking back, if I had known that that was a possibility the first day, I think I would have had a totally different outlook on it. Like, I wasn't told there was a way to get better. I was just told, yep, you're doomed. I'm lucky though. I dealt with it relatively early. Apparently my mom and my then psychologist had been discussing BPD for quite a while before the diagnosis, but they were waiting to decide because of my youth. I wasn't informed of this until later. Therefore, I was diagnosed at 19, as I said, and started dealing with it at 20. I can't know how my life would have been different if I'd been diagnosed and then taught DBT earlier. All I know is that I'm grateful I dealt with it when I did, because I do see the differences between me and several of my friends who were diagnosed later in life. I consider myself quite lucky to have been given the opportunity to do the hard work as soon as I was. Some of my friends with borderline didn't stick with DBT. They stopped going to groups or flat out refused because they didn't think it was enough trauma work. So it must therefore be useless. Some just didn't want to do the work. They said it's too hard, it's not helping. These friends sometimes pop up in my life. Their chaos ebbing and flowing. I had to set a lot of boundaries there. One of them was actually my best friend for a few years. She was diagnosed later than me and quit DBT not long after leaving her program. After she said some truly horrendous things to someone I love, I told her I was tired of making excuses for her. I set a boundary. We could be friends, but not on Facebook and not as close. When she got help, maybe we'd reevaluate. She sobbed over the phone that it wasn't her fault. She had borderline. And I told her, so do I. But I'm dealing with it. We met in treatment. She should know this. Mental illness isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's your responsibility. Even though it may not be your fault that you have the problems you have, it is your responsibility to work on them. DBT assumptions for the win. As I suspect you all know, it's incredibly hard to watch people hurting when they won't let you save them or even help, especially when you know in your heart that what you have can help them. I did something strange here. Where's the rest of my speech? Can you pass me my book, please? I think I left it in there. And missing parts. Sorry.
We're all missing parts.
All right. I don't know what I did with it.
What's your bag?
I had it earlier.
Okay, maybe it's out of order.
All right. Well, let's wing it.
Take a couple.
I have my phone. It's on my phone.
Oh.
I am sneaky.
Smart girl.
Mainly because I use Google Docs. But that's not Sorry about that. 1 minute. I did not see that coming. I got nothing. There it is. Okay, let me find where I am, because I don't even know that now. I'm totally distracted. Should have just started on the phone in the first place. There we go. Okay. Let's see. To steal the phrase from elsewhere, it works if you work it. It's not a perfect system. There's some flaws that I hadn't seen until today. And nothing works universally. But it can save lives when you let it. When you work with it and not against it. I self-harmed for most of my life, as I said. I've now been clean 2.5 years as of exactly 2 days ago.
Bravo.
That's 1 year and 8 months longer than ever before, and an estimated 2 years and 4 months longer than my record before DBT. I still struggled for a time after leaving Clearview. It's important to know that the work doesn't magically end when you get treatment. You have to keep trying, keep pushing. It's a battle that lasts, but the end result is incredible. You take your victories, you learn from your failures, and you keep moving forward. You learn to forgive yourself when you slip up and not sit in the misery. Some days I still have to remind myself why I'm doing this. Some days it's so hard. Truthfully though, it's hard either way. You have to pick your hard. Is it harder to live with BPD or to fight it? I made my choice, and I don't think it was the wrong one. It's gotten easier over time. As I said, I haven't hurt myself despite quite a few recent urges. I keep using this DBT-based technique, which is sort of the idea. It's evolved quite a bit, but when I was first trying to get better, back in my days at Clearview, it basically involved refusing to get out of bed, which sounds counterproductive when I say it out loud. I just knew that if I got out of bed, I'd try to kill myself. No doubt in my mind. So I'd stay in bed until I fell asleep, because this usually happened at night. That leads me to now, both in a literal, I'm still alive because I didn't kill myself kind of way, and in a, this is sort of my point that I am failing to get to kind of way. This will take a moment, so bear with me. That first time I OD'd, a nurse at the hospital told me it was lucky I hadn't tried to OD on a certain other, she named it, readily available pain medication. She chatted about the irreversible effects of that drug if taken in large doses. Right in front of both me, this girl who'd literally OD'd the night before, and my mother, who was literally sitting there reading a very long suicide note I'd written. Well, do you know how much I wanted to die? I do. And I can tell you that no matter how bad it got after that, and it got bad sometimes, I never took that drug for anything, including the prescribed usages. I knew it could kill me, and I knew it would be painful regardless of whether or not I tried to back out. I never managed to want to die badly enough that I didn't leave myself a back door, just in case. It's been 7 years, but I've never bought that drug. I don't think I've even taken it more than once or twice, when there was no other option, until last month when my doctor basically said I had to for a few days, if I didn't want to be in horrific pain from my broken foot. Don't worry, it's much better now. See, got a brace and everything. I'm not the only one who hasn't forgotten, though. My mom didn't want me to keep the bottle of it in my apartment after I stopped needing it last month. Yeah, 2.5 years clean, and we both are still afraid to fully trust that I won't impulsively attempt suicide. It's a lot of programming we're undoing, you know? I said earlier that I used to lie in bed because if I got out, I'd try to kill myself. It was about postponing it, basically. I'd been told repeatedly the feeling would pass if I just let it. But I had to give it a chance. Staying in bed was my way of giving the feeling time to pass. I didn't realize I still did that sort of tactic, but I do. The last few weeks have been very hard, thanks to a few unfortunate interpersonal issues. For the record, I didn't make them worse this time. I've been fighting the urge more than is now typical. Back in the day, I wouldn't have waited this long. I'd be positive it would never go away, and if I just did it and got it out of my system. Like craving a certain food, that's how it felt. If you want chocolate cake, cream of kale soup isn't going to make you stop wanting it. Also, it sounds really gross, but that's not the point. That was my logic anyway. My delaying tactics now are, I think, kind of amusing. I can't self-harm right now. My girlfriend is home, and it would upset her. I don't want her to feel she has to do something about it. I can't self-harm right now. My girlfriend isn't home, and I don't want her to feel guilty later for not being there. I can't self-harm right now. I'm at work, and it's got to be a safe space for my students. I can't self-harm right now. I'm at home, and it's a safe space for me. On and on, I kept coming up with excuses. And this is the funniest part. It took about 2 weeks of doing this before I realized consciously that I'd been delaying. What I'd been unthinkingly saying to myself was that I'd just wait to self-harm until I decided for sure if I really wanted to. Joke's on me, though. I am the most indecisive person I have ever met. I can barely decide what water bottle I want to get, and whether I want this faucet filter or that one to fill it. How incredibly weird is it that I would have seemed so decisive and thought I was so decisive about death? I mean, you have to admit, or maybe you don't, your choice. There's something very funny about me having been suicidal so much of my life, because there's no bigger decision than death. If I can't even decide enough to commit to a jam flavor for my breakfast toast, how am I supposed to trust that I'll always want to die? I mean, maybe later I'll wish I'd had the raspberry jam instead. This may have been a bit of a tangent, but I think it's an important one. I still have a DBT therapist, but I graduated from group a few years back. We rarely talk skills directly, because I actually operate through skills now. It's automatic. She just reminds me when I need reminding of something, you know. Hey, have you tried this? Oh, that kind of thing. I no longer have to consciously stop myself from engaging in self-harm, as I said. It's automatic. I don't make a Herculean effort to stop trying to kill myself. It's automatic. I play the tape out, and it's never a pretty ending. When I was in that place, self-harming and suicidal, the future didn't exist. The present barely did either, only the misery and urges. Instead, I have an amazing life now that I could never have dreamed of in the depths of it. I went back to college, graduated, and eventually got a job working with special needs adults, something I applied for on a whim and happened to really love. I can see spending the rest of my life in this field doing this work. I have a girlfriend who I adore, who couldn't be here, long story, who adores me and who I have never had a major fight with in the 8 months we've been together. That sounds kind of odd until I say that when one of us is upset, we're both able to talk it through, calmly, saying what bothers us and expressing why, rather than attacking and blaming. I can pause long enough to figure out exactly why I'm upset, and whether it's something I need to discuss, or if it's more of an internal processing thing. Modified dear man, as I said, are extremely useful when we need to sort things out. I explain why I'm upset. I validate a lot. I talk about what we could do differently, and I talk about how I feel. An argument could be made that I make it all about me, but it's done in a way that allows space for both of us. We actually had a discussion in the car where we were literally, it would be a minute or two before each one of us spoke, because we were thinking about what the other had said and processing it, which is kind of cool, actually. So no, never a real fight. Wait, I take it back. We did have one fight, but it was about the Harry Potter-based play, Cursed Child, and we were laughing at ourselves as we argued. And I stand by what I said, it is totally fan fiction. I could never have imagined such peace in my life. I could never have imagined the stability. Yes, there are ups and downs, that's life for you. But the waves are smaller than they were, even when they don't feel that small, because my actions aren't usually contributing to them. There have been a lot of times I wanted to quit. I complained to my amazing DBT therapist, who I mentioned, that using skills is frustrating. It just isn't satisfying. I wanted my immediate gratification, darn it. She acknowledged that, in the short term, using skills will never feel as good as using behaviors. But living with skills feels so much better than living with behaviors and their consequences. Having friends without breaking their hearts with the push-pull of BPD feels better. Not having to hide or flaunt behaviors feels better. Living without constantly planning to die feels much better. I can remember lying on the grass outside this exact building one day, maybe a month into starting, staring up at the sky through one of the trees, and just marveling that colors were so bright, that things felt real, that I was alive. I felt like I'd never truly been alive before. There are a lot of different ways to live your life. For me, skillfully is the best option. I've never regretted my work with DBT. It was hard, but wow, was it worth it. And I guess I'll take questions now. So yeah, questions.
I just think I have to just tell you how amazing I think you are, and you need to do a blog, and you can heal so many people with your experience. And you're very, very bright, and the fact that you were able to make these accomplishments, and in most mental conditions we can't do it on our own, and I'm so glad you reached out for help and took it in. What to you was, as they say in addiction treatment, you hit bottom to finally surrender to do this work, because it's different than any other kind of therapy.
For me, the final straw was at the first treatment center I was sent to, which was a PHP program. I'm not going to say which one. And they just weren't equipped to deal with this kind of, with BPD. They weren't equipped for it. And they knew it, and they kept saying, you need Clearview. But we didn't think we could do it at that point. It's a long story. I won't go into the details. But they happened to be near a hospital, so that was just 2 times I got sent over in 1 month to that hospital, because I would go in and they'd be like, are you suicidal? And I'd go, yeah. Do you have a plan? Yeah. Oh, well then we'll send you to the hospital. I'm like, that's not helpful. You're not helping. And they didn't know what to do with me, and after I'd taken a bunch of sleeping pills in one of their rooms without, telling anyone, and I started texting my brother, and I'm like, hey, just wanted to say I love you. And he's like, wait, what's going on? Because he knows me a little too well. It's a little alarming. Because if I send him a text saying I love you, his immediate reaction is, what's wrong? Because he knows that I love him, but if I send it out of the blue, something's up. And he knows that, and I should really remember that. But I did that, and then I panicked, because I was like, what if one of the other, I hadn't even thought of this, what if one of the other clients here finds me? I hadn't considered that at all. It hadn't even occurred to me that that was a possibility. So I went to one of the staff and I'm like, hey, I just did this thing, and I also can't walk very straight right now. That was the second time they sent me to the hospital. But they're like, yeah, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep you here. Basically, I flunked out of my first treatment center. And that's a special feeling. I was telling Alina that at one point I tried to switch from a DBT program. After I left here, I was like, all right, my therapist told me something I don't like. So I tried to switch to a different therapist. And we went through the whole thing, and I had to be told, don't tell this new therapist that you had BPD. Don't tell them that you self-harmed, because they won't take you if you do. And I was like, well, that's not reassuring. But I went with it. We told them that the self-harm was in the past, about a month in the past, but that's not the point. So the urges come back, as they do, and I tell her, like I'm supposed to, and she tells me, all right, we're gonna commit you to the hospital. And I'm like, but we've done this before. It doesn't help. Hospitals are great, they have their place, but they don't cure you. They medicate you, and that's great. I am on medication, it helps. It's not the only thing that helps. So I guess that's a long-winded answer.
Thank you.
Hi, congratulations on your journey of healing
Thank you.
and for speaking to us today. I'm curious, what one or two or more, whatever comes to mind, hopeful experiences or thoughts, or where did you derive hope, begin your journey, something that we could pass along to our clients?
It's a hard question. I think one of the main things was just being told this isn't a death sentence. Because, like I said, that's what I was told to start with. Like, being told to keep hope alive. This isn't a bad thing. This diagnosis does not come attached with doom, you know? And keep trying. Like, it's not gonna be perfect the first time you try a skill. It's not immediate, it's not instant fix. And I think the other thing is really validate that they are sitting in this misery. Like, it is uncomfortable to be this way, to feel this way. One of my past therapists used to describe, past DBT therapist, that's important, used to describe it as you're in the middle of a burning basement, and you know it's burning, and DBT is a burning ladder. It's a metal ladder that will help you out of the basement, but it's gonna hurt. But you still wanna try it, because once you get out of the basement, there's fresh air. Staying in the basement is worse than getting out. So that's an important one for me. That one really, really kept me going, because I'm like, I don't wanna be in that basement anymore. I don't wanna keep feeling this way. I don't wanna keep repeating the same things, because it's like being on a merry-go-round. You keep doing the same things, expecting to get off the merry-go-round, and none of it's getting you off. That sounded weird.